is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us. Our guest today is Michael Rubio. Mr. Rubio is a member of the California State Senate. And in this portion of our program, we're going to speak with Mr. Rubio about the higher education system in our great state of California, which we know has been under tremendous distress as a result of the state's budget crisis. I recently learned that the state is spending $1 billion less on the UC system than it did 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And I think the even more startling fact is if you look at the last decade to decade and a half, our priorities have become skewed in that if you look at the spending per ratio to the California Department of Corrections, there was a time in which we spent $5 to every $1 on the California Department of Corrections, and now we are spending dollar for dollar.
Well, as I understand it, and I'm a wealth of irrelevant information, so just indulge me if you may. In the 1980s, 70% of California's budget went to higher ed, 3% went to prisons. Today, 9% goes to higher ed, 11% goes to prisons. That's a flip. And our prisons are overcrowded to boot.
You just highlighted the fact of the point I'm trying to make. Now, realignment's going to have a big impact on that. Secondly, the other driving cost in incarcerating inmates is this issue of health care.
We're under receivership.
Oh, it's
federal
ridiculous.
Receivership.
But if you look at just the raw numbers, we spend on average $16,000 per inmate to provide medical care. If you look at neighboring states who provide adequate care for their inmates, they are literally half that number.
But the question becomes, why are these individuals in prison? And many believe they are in prison because they were not provided adequate educational opportunities.
You know, it's a vicious cycle. If we don't provide an opportunity for someone to be a law-abiding citizen, right? We've got to educate them, we've got to train them, and we have to have jobs, quite frankly. The other issue that we haven't talked about often in the legislature in this particular year is the need for jobs. That is, if there is a silver bullet in any of this, once you get educated, once you're trained, you've got to be able to get employment so that you can provide food for your family.
But the challenge becomes for those that do go to college, because the prices are increasing so much, the debt burden is literally overwhelming. And we know people are they're going bankrupt because of their student loans, and yet those loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. A whole other conversation.
Oh, it is.
But let's focus on the UC system. Mm-hmm. Many believe that it remains a crown jewel in our great state, but the prices are going up higher than any other system in the country. And you are concerned about those that are enrolling in the UC system. Talk to us about the ratios that we are seeing in terms of enrollment.
I am, and thank you for bringing it up. If you look at not only the increase in fees and tuition, there's a trend now with the regents at the University of California to now enroll at a higher rate out-of-state and international students, and we all know because they pay more than in-state students. And it's alarming on the fact because if you look at just last year alone, 43% of those who were enrolled in UCs, there was a 43% increase, rather, of out-of-state students. And what that essentially does is it provides for those who are competing, outperforming, state university or state students the ability to get a chair or a seat in those UCs.
Is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, I think about California's geography. From Los Angeles to San Francisco is the same distance between Washington, D.C. and Providence. A lot of very rich, diverse cities along the eastern seaboard. I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing to have geographic diversity come into our state. I mean, if we're all 90% Californians, where's the global view?
I would say two things. First, for those families and those parents who have lived in California for decades, they've invested hard-earned tax dollars to build the campuses, build the intellectual capacity for these wonderful flagship University of California schools like Berkeley, UCLA, UC San Diego, so that it can be a state system. They're not going to be able to have a front of the line position to get into those schools now, even when their children are outperforming the out-of-state student.
So let's talk about your proposal. Sure. Right now, the UC regents have a policy that they will create a system whereby 90% of all students system-wide are Californians. That's right. 10% are out-of-state or foreign. The policy is just that, a policy, and right now I think the numbers are around 12% system-wide. You are looking to write a constitutional amendment.
I am.
To mandate exactly what?
to mandate that their standard, the 10%, isn't statewide or system-wide rather, but it's per each university. I think it's common sense. If they say the standard ought to be 10%, then it ought to apply to every university in the system. Whereas UC Berkeley today is 30%. 1 in 3 students is an out-of-state or international student.
But let's think about some of the other outstanding institutions around the country that are state-run. University of Michigan, University of Virginia, University of Colorado. They have about 30% out-of-staters. And those systems run very effectively. It's a tremendous geographic melting pot. I mean, a lot of our friends went to Michigan or went to Virginia, Colorado, and I don't know. I just really wonder whether the answer is to limit enrollment.
I think the question is this. Do we want brain drain to occur in California? Because the stories, well, let me tell you the real life stories that I'm being told.
Please.
The parents are calling and saying, I have got one child 4 years ago got into Berkeley and UCLA. I have a second child 4 years later who has gotten better grades, more competitive in terms of test scores, did more extracurricular activity, got waitlisted at Berkeley and UCLA, and now they're going to Cornell. That child would much rather be here in California.
But are they not getting in because of out-of-state admissions or because we're decreasing enrollment due to the budget crisis?
I would say it's the first, because what we have found is that President Udolph and others are shifting the business model to lure and recruit more out-of-state students. And the question is, do we want to become a private university or keep it a state-run university?
Do you blame him? I mean, honestly, think about it.
I don't blame him, but we don't take any other resource. Look at the investments we've made in water, in energy, in any other resource. We don't then take that resource and sell it to the rest of the country. We use that resource to benefit and create a competitive advantage for California.
What about this? What about creating a law, a constitutional amendment, whatever it may be, which would allow the cap to float based upon the budgetary status of the state? Because at certain times, we just may need more out-of-staters to help fund the UC system.
Let me ask the other question, because it has not been brought up. How about we look at the cuts that the regents are making in the layers of different bureaucracy they have within the University of California system? There are chancellors to a president, to a president, to a president, to a vice president. So I would ask...
Efficiencies, fine, but there are efficiencies throughout state government.
But we're only talking about the University of California
system.
There you
have it. Go.
So if we're going to examine in this, I would make the argument that this 10% standard that they've set, I didn't set the standard, they did.
But you are changing it.
Absolutely.
You are. It's a bold move. I mean, it's a very...
I think we ought to fundamentally keep the University of California system a state crown jewel. If we are not careful and we don't set this cap, then it will soon become a private university system,
well, what about
by definition.
I mean, you talk about a brain drain. You know, let's bring some of the best from Florida in, and they'll stay here. It's a brain lure.
Absolutely.
But if you're capping at 10%.
Here's the struggle, though. We know we don't have broad immigration reform. So if you take an international student here to get on a student visa, then they leave. Then they leave this nation. And so you talk about brain drain, in that seat is being occupied international. Yeah. And so they're occupying a seat that a valedictorian from California could otherwise occupy, and then they leave this nation.
I don't know if you know this, Congressman Adam Schiff is looking at that very issue. Good. He's from Southern California.
I hope he moves forward on this subject. So between that and my provision, we would really have a robust
Call Adam
future.
Schiff when you have a chance. I do want to get a sense of where we are on this proposal, because I'm sure that there's a lot of support for it.
Oh, we've got a number of co-authors, and I'm proud of the support the sponsors asked me to step forward. Those are the workers that actually, they're the janitors, they clean the university system.
Why do they care? I don't mean that pejoratively, but why do they care?
They're parents. They want their children the ability to go to these fine institutions for which they're cleaning the toilets, cleaning the classrooms, they're making sure they run.
Is this a ballot initiative, or is this it's a
constitutional amendment which will then go before the voters either in 2012 or 2014.
Would have to go to the voters.
It will have to go to the voters.
And so are you collecting signatures now? Where are we on this?
We don't need to collect signatures if we pass through the legislature with a 2/3 vote. And so we have until the end of June to make this November ballot. If not, we'll have to go to the ballot in 2014.
His name is Michael Rubio, member of the California State Senate. When we come back, we're going to be speaking with a member of the California State Assembly. His name is Luis Alejo. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.
Which public university charges the highest tuition for out-of-state students? Pennsylvania State University, the University of California, the University of Illinois, or the University of Michigan? According to a U.S. News and World Report 2012 survey, The University of Michigan charges the highest tuition rates for out-of-state students. 7 UCs made the top 10.
It's California Edition, and welcome back. We are speaking with Assemblyman Luis Alejo. He represents portions of South San Jose and beyond. And I want to speak with him about an area that so many young men and older men enjoy, and that is mixed martial arts, which is exactly what, Assemblyman?
Well, mixed martial art, now known as MMA, is one of the fastest growing sports in the United States. It now has surpassed professional boxing, professional wrestling. It's televised in 130 countries. But basically what it is, it's a full combat sport. So you could see a fight where there's a kickboxer fighting a wrestler, somebody who specializes in jiu-jitsu.
It's not choreographed. It's not like WWE, for example.
Not at all. This is no holds barred, basically. A lot of different martial arts coming together, and the best person wins in the end. The sport has really evolved. It first came on national television back in 1993 with very little rules of the sport, and now it's just grown, become so popular that it has a very strong following here in the United States.
And what's interesting, when you think about boxing, for example, you think about Nevada. Nevada kind of is the hub of professional boxing. What I didn't know until you told me is the hub of MMA is not Nevada, but California.
Right. Last year they had about 100 MMA professional fights, and the number keeps growing every year. Sold out crowds, whether it's in San Jose or Southern California. And with that comes, a lot of ticket sales, a lot of pay-per-view sales, merchandise sales, so it's rapidly growing.
And you're a big fan of MMA, I take it.
I've been a big fan since the very beginning.
Are you a fighter?
Well, no, I wasn't a fighter, but in high school and college, I was a team captain of our local wrestling team, placed in the state championship. So as a young wrestler, it was a sport that you naturally gravitate to.
Right.
And you become a big fan since day one.
But here's the challenge, and it's almost as if MMA is growing up just like WWE grew up, which is there's not a lot of protections for the fighters themselves. We heard 5-7 years ago there was a lot of contention between WWE and their athletes. Now that exact same thing is happening today with MMA. The athletes are feeling as if they are being exploited, they are feeling powerless, and they don't know where to turn, but they're turning to you.
Right, and I'm carrying a bill, AB 2100, and it's basically trying to create the first ever ethical standards, professional code of conduct for the promoters in this sport. But it also prohibit, exploitive provisions and contracts for the fighters, because what doesn't exist in MMA fighting is other sports have their own professional leagues, associations for the players.
There's no union, I take it.
There's no union association, but basketball has it, professional baseball has it, boxers now have it, but there's no such association of its kind in MMA fighting.
So you're looking to regulate the industry. We'll talk more about the specifics of your proposal, but I want to ask about the fact that this will be a forerunner. As California goes, so goes the nation, or maybe not. And if California passes this legislation, could not the promoter simply say, oh, well, California won't be our state, we'll go to Nevada? And as a result, California will lose a significant revenue source because the fights won't happen here, they'll happen in Nevada.
Well, the same argument happened when they passed the federal Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act because of the same types of abuses within the boxing sport. But you could see boxing is
law.
It's federal, but as you said, here in California, it's the first of its kind. Eventually, I can guarantee it will be the national standard. But here in California, it's the largest market. There's over 35 million people. Some of the biggest fights have happened here in California, and the sport is only thriving within California. In states like Connecticut and New York, we actually prohibit MMA fighting.
Oh, really?
The opponents actually have been lobbying hard in those state legislatures to open it because there's a big market in states like New York. They would love to have MMA fights happening at Madison Square Garden as well. So that's not the case, and where states that had prohibited it, they've been fighting to open those doors in those states.
So let's talk about what your bill does specifically, and I really want to drill deep because we think that people who are on television automatically make a lot of money. I can tell you that's not true. And you're watching these MMA fights, but the reality is that these fighters, these athletes, are not making a living because of the way you say these contracts are drafted.
Right. So first of all, some of these contracts, they get paid very little. You're talking about the new fighters, the young fighters, the lower level fighters. They get paid very little. This is an expensive sport for your training, your team, your traveling expenses. Sometimes for a fight, you get almost very little, not even to pay your training costs.
But I guess what your concern is not so much that people have to grow into higher salaries, but they get locked into long contracts.
Right.
And they are deemed to be exclusive to a certain promoter, which means they cannot work with another promoter. Is that really what you're looking at?
Right. So even if it's unfair, it's a take it or leave it mentality right now within the sport because there's such a discrepancy. Some of the promoters control about 80 to 90% of the industry. And so when you're a young fighter and you're trying to get your first contracts, it's either take it or leave it. And some of those contracts, just to give you two examples,
Please.
For example, it's like a merchandising agreement, which would sign away a fighter's the rights to their likeness, their image, their name in perpetuity, meaning
life.
forever. Right.
Is that even legal? I mean, I used to be a lawyer. You're a lawyer. Isn't there a 7-year rule? I have a vague recollection of that.
Not in MMA fighting, you know. And so some of the fighters, it's either take it or leave it, and if they walk away, it's hard for them to even get another fight when the promoters control so much of the industry.
I read about this from you. There's a champions clause. This is quite surprising.
Right. So if you get a contract, and at the end of that contract you become the national champion, now the same terms would be extended.
It's an automatic extension.
Automatic extension.
Aren't you supposed to be able to renegotiate when you get big?
Especially, yeah, when you're a big name, you know, usually when you become a world boxing champion, you're able to get the benefits of that because you become the world champion. That doesn't exist in MMA with these types of provisions being put into the contracts.
Well, let's talk about the challenges in terms of getting a bill like this passed. I presume that the promoters have very high-paid lobbyists swarming the halls of Sacramento across the street. So tell me about the status. How is this bill going? I can't imagine it'll be easy to get out of the legislature.
Right. Well, the opponents, of course, have hired a pretty strong team of folks to oppose this bill as it's gone through. But nonetheless, we've been able to get it out of its first policy committee. It's headed this week through Appropriations Committee. We've included amendments to lower any costs that would apply to the state to make sure it gets out of committee. So we're pretty confident. We got a good momentum and support for the bill, but it's certainly not needed, and I'm going to keep fighting for this bill until we get it enacted into law.
Well, what's the governor say? Because in the end, he has to sign the bill, and you know, it's interesting. The governor really doesn't get involved in legislation, not just this governor, any governor. So you can spend all this time on this bill, and he could just veto it, but can you do any pre-lobbying with the governor's office?
Right. We've been in contact, and we're going to continue to be in contact with the governor and with members of the Assembly as it goes to the full debate on the floor, same in the Senate. But basically, California has led on a lot of areas in terms in boxing. In the 1990s, we had greater, more stringent standards than any other state in the country. And I think it's time the sport has got to a level where we could take that next level. It's evolved. Now it should include some fairness and equity in its contracts as well for its fighters.
How did this issue come to you? I know that you're a fan of the sport, but why is Luis Alejo the key promoter, if I could use that term, of this bill?
An interesting story. ESPN did a documentary. They have a program called Outside the Lines. They did a documentary going into MMA fighting to find out what's happening within the sports, what's happening to these young fighters. And as they started interviewing folks, it turned out a lot of fighters were even afraid to speak, fearing that they would be blackballed from getting another fight. But then also they started looking into what's happening with the contracts and then fairness, and looking at what happened with the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, that those same protections for boxers do not extend to MMA fighters. So I researched it.
Have you spoken with any promoters? I mean, have you tried to get some of them on board?
Well, we've been open. We've been meeting with, when you carry a bill like this, you always have your door open. Look at all points of view, see where you can make adjustments. But at this point, the opponents have said they just don't think it's necessary at all, have been willing to negotiate, and even look at other ways where we can have this move forward together.
What about federalize the issue?
But that would be the next level, and same as in California, where we had the first discussions of creating the national standard for boxing. It eventually did become federal. I think the same is happening with MMA. We're having the first discussion here in California, and eventually get to that point as well.
So we'll know this year if the bill goes?
Yes.
It's a one-year bill?
It's a one-year bill, so again, if it doesn't move forward this year, there's always next year, but we're confident we want to make it happen this year.
And hopefully you'll be back on the program. His name is Luis Alejo, member of the California State Assembly. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Assemblywoman Shannon Grove. She is mixing it up, no doubt. She is calling for the California legislature to go part-time. You won't want to miss our discussion with Shannon Grove. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.
In what year did California vote in favor of creating a full-time legislative body in Sacramento? In November 1966, California passed Proposition 1A, creating a full-time legislature with 73.5% of the vote.
Welcome to California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us. Our guest is Shannon Grove. Shannon is a member of the California State Assembly, and she is trying to shake it up in a big way in her first term. There have been lots of calls for reform in Sacramento, and Shannon no doubt has one of the most bold, and that deals with whether the legislature should be full-time or part-time.
Exactly.
What does Assemblywoman Grove think?
Well, you know, I've only been here 18 months, but I really think the system is broken. So when I started looking at research about the past history of the state, we used to have a part-time legislature.
We did.
I met with Governor Perry, and I've also
of
Texas, and I've also researched other legislative bodies in different states, and come to find out there's 44 other states that have part-time legislatures.
Let's talk about it, because no doubt it's on the minds of California voters whether Sacramento is working, and we've heard this proposal floated. I mean, you have been very public about it. I want to kind of push you on it, though, and try to figure out how it would work out. If we consider that California is the 9th largest economy,
It used to be 5th.
That's true.
Okay.
It's absolutely true. Yeah, and we got to figure out why.
Full-time legislature, it's gone with the self-inflicted paper cuts that have driven business out of the state. It's gone to 9th, almost ready to go to 10th.
But is the way to do it to keep people out of Sacramento for such a large economy? I mean, is that going to be the most efficient and effective way?
Texas has a large economy. Florida has a large economy. There are 44 other states that have a part-time legislature. So,
what about the concern that if we do have a part-time legislature, that it will only embolden and make the executive branch more powerful? Because the governor will be there full-time and the 120 members wouldn't.
What can he do if we're not there? He can't pass legislation if we're not there to pass it. He can't, there's things that all three branches of government have to be involved in order for the government to function.
But if you think about it, and again, I'm just, playing it out. If you think about it, though, the governor, the executive branch, has a lot of power generally. They have the executive agencies, and they can sign executive orders. They can do a lot without the legislature. And if the legislature isn't there looking over his or her shoulder because they're part-time, a lot of mischief could be done, one could argue.
One could argue that, but 44 other states have a part-time legislature. All of those 44 other states are better economically than California. Think about it. California used to be first, and now we're worst economically. We used to be first in education, now we're last. So the bottom line, in some measures, but the bottom line is that 44 other states do this, including Florida and other states like Texas, which are large land masses.
Here's another question. When you think about who runs for office today, they are people who are able to change professions, for example. You, for example, have a business and you are able to run for office. This is a full-time job right now. If the legislature is part-time, there's a concern who would be able to run for part-time office. The wealthy,
anybody
the retired.
That runs now.
But I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, let's say I'm a lawyer. Let's just say, for example, I'm a lawyer. A lot of legislators are lawyers. If I have a practice, a legal practice, I can't take time off my practice to go to Sacramento for 3 months.
It's a maximum of 3 months. It's not a full 3 months. It's a maximum of 3 months. And when you consider all the time that's wasted, like right now, the May revise came out, and we're billions of dollars and $15.7 billion in the hole. And we're passing bills off the floor yesterday that are coupon month. Okay, there's a lot of time wasted on your hands if you can come up with coupon month.
But it is a concern. Who will be able to run? I mean, you have the blessing that you have a functioning business.
Anybody that can run, that runs now.
You really think, though? I mean,
absolutely.
Let's say you're a teacher. There are a couple teachers in the legislature right now. They couldn't do this. They couldn't be a teacher and a legislator at the same time. They have to leave their teaching profession and be a full-time legislator.
But it wouldn't be full-time. It's a maximum of 90 days.
Right, but the teacher, unless it's over the summer, how would a teacher become a member of the legislature?
Well, it's a maximum of 90 days. They'd go through the election process just like anybody else does. When they come up here, they'd set the legislative council or the legislative schedule. So the legislative
But would the schedule be over the summer?
It depends on what the legislative body decided to do. It'd be a vote of the legislative body.
What about lobbyists? That's what we hear all the time. With term limits, lobbyists are very powerful because there's no institutional memory. If it's a part-time legislature, lobbyists will be very powerful because they'll be there in 12 months and the legislators wouldn't be.
Well, I was looking at things to defend that statement, and the only thing I can say basically is where's their $1 million to qualify the ballot measure if they're going to be in so much power?
Meaning, play it out.
Play it out, meaning that if it's going to give them so much power, why are they not helping make it work? They don't like it. Lobbyists and legislators don't like this bill. Now, it polls very well with the California people. Very
It is.
well.
I mean, I have seen
is,
polls, and there's no doubt.
It polls at a supermajority.
Yeah, that the numbers are rising.
Absolutely.
No doubt. Where are we on this proposal? It is bold. I mean, Assemblywoman, you are really mixing it up.
Well, we're gathering signatures right now. We have till July 1st to be able to get all the signatures that we need to put it on the 2014 ballot. We're well over halfway there. Ronald Reagan's son, Michael Reagan, has come on board as the chair. Jeb Bush, the former governor of Florida, endorsed it on a Newsmax interview.
In any way, will the part-time legislature proposal interact with term limits? Are you going to look at term limits as well, or the term limits will stay however they are, and this is completely separate?
It's a separate ballot measure. Term limits will stay as they are, and then it would just be part-time. Maximum of 90 days instead of roughly $150,000 a year pay, meaning $95,000 for the per diem and all the perks. Then it would take it down to $18,000, which is double the amount of Texas and triple the amount of Florida. We're the highest paid legislators in the nation.
Is that bad?
Why?
Well, fair enough. You know, some would argue you get what you pay for. And
well, okay, throw that argument back. You pay us $150,000 a year.
And what are we
doing for the state? What are the citizens of California getting for $150,000 per legislator? They're getting the highest unemployment rate almost in the nation.
Yeah. We're
almost
48.
in the nation. 48. So we're almost the highest unemployment rate. And we have all the natural resources, plus our oil finds, plus the Balkan Shelf, plus everything that we offer in this state.
But could it be that, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but the way we tax, I mean, you know this as well as anyone. Our tax code.
The regulatory process, not allowing for us to access our natural resources that we have available to us. So the bottom line is that when you say you get what you pay for, the citizens of the state of California pay us $150,000 a year. What are they getting for that? They're getting somebody who is actually up here part-time. Seriously, we're up here on a full-time basis, but your committees, if you add up all the time you spend on committees and all the time that you spend on the floor, you have 13-minute floor sessions. If you add all that time together, 55% of your time, 55% of your time is spent outside the building, raising money to keep your job.
Well, that we know for sure.
You know, so how is that a service to our citizens of the how is that a service to the citizens of California?
Well, what if assembly members, for example, had to run less often, maybe 4-year terms like the Senate, because you don't have to raise money as often?
That's an option too. Right now, with single source subjects on ballot measures that dealt with a part-time legislature, and we set up four actual key issues: 90 days instead of 9 months, or a maximum of 90 days. Limit the time that they're here. Limit the pay.
Limit the time. Oh, the 3 months, right?
The 3 months. So limit the pay to $18,000 instead of the roughly $150,000 with the salary plus per diem, and then not allow them to be appointed to a state board or commission afterwards. They have to go home and live, or go someplace and live under the rules that they create. They can't make a deal for 5 years. 5 years. They can't make a deal or whatever they do and then get appointed to a state board or commission for $150,000 a year.
You just have to pushing the envelope.
Live under the rules that you make, and give us a 2-year balanced budget. The citizens of the state of California deserve a 2-year balanced budget certified by the Treasurer's Office and the State Controller's Office.
Just between us, no one's watching right now.
Yeah.
That's
what you said.
Exactly. What are your fellow members saying? Both sides of the aisle.
Both sides of the aisle. I haven't got a lot of support from either side of the aisle. Assemblymember Martin Garrick was very, very favorable towards it.
A Republican member?
Yes. Mr. Donnelly was very favorable, and so is Ms. Halderman. But other than that, there hasn't been anybody that has come on board.
All I can say is, Shannon Grove, you are mixing it up. I am so glad you are creating the conversation, because it is a conversation that we must have.
We have to.
And please come back. I really want to have you back on the program again.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you, Brad.
My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching California.